You're listening to the Cancer Assist podcast. Wherever you are in your experience, we are here to provide help and hope as you navigate cancer prevention, treatment, and care. Hosted by Dr. Bill Evans and brought to you by the Cancer Assistance Program. Help when you really need it.
Well, welcome to the Cancer Assist Show with Dr. Bill Evans. I'm Dr. Bill Evans, and I'm here today with Janna Boloten. And Janna's been a guest on the Cancer Assist Show back in 2020. Janna's a registered dietitian and a nutrition science advisor at Abbott Nutrition. And welcome back, Janna. Nice to see you.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. It's great to be back.
Now, when we talked previously, we gave a lot of advice about nutritional support, particularly as individuals were more advanced in their cancer journey with more palliative care needs at that time. Today we're going to talk at the other end of the cancer journey, shall we say, the patients who are about to undergo surgery. And of course, most patients, to get a diagnosis of cancer, undergo cancer surgery. Now, it may be very minor, might just be a biopsy, but for those who are going to have a significant operation, which could include things like having a pulmonary resection or lung resection, or taking out an esophagus, or a major intra-abdominal surgery, that's a much bigger event in the life of an individual because it's going to place a lot of stresses on the body and the need to recover after a surgery. So this is we want to impart some information to patients about how best to prepare themselves for surgery, to get fit more or less for this event. And why don't I throw it over to you? Why is it such a big event? What does the surgery do to the patient that they actually need to prepare for it, and particularly from a nutrition point of view, Janna?
Sure. So this is a topic that I'm particularly passionate about, I think because it represents a topic that I only started learning about post-graduating. So this wasn't really something that we learned in our nutrition training back when I was in university. It's a new area. And I think that's exciting because it's just yet another opportunity where nutrition can truly be therapeutic and make a difference. So to answer your question about, what does undergoing surgery really do to the body and why is nutrition so important here? Surgery is a huge event where the body undergoes a major stressor. There's, of course, a recovery period, and it's basically your body is going through this very vulnerable state where organs have been manipulated, organs have been removed, and there's been perhaps an incision, so there's healing involved there as well. On top of all of that, the person undergoing surgery in this context is a person with cancer, and so they already have underlying disease. So the surgery itself will bring on an inflammatory response, a healing response to recover, and that's all occurring in someone who is already vulnerable and already in a suboptimal state of health, let's say. So the body is weak, the body gets even weaker during surgery, and so it needs all the help it can get to recover from that event.
So there's several aspects to that, isn't there? There's the insult of the surgery. We'll call it an insult. Surgeons even call it an insult, I understand. But you're cutting, you're bruising, you're removing things that need to be healed together. And that causes a whole metabolic response, an inflammatory response in and of itself. And then there's the post-operative period during which often, depending on the nature of the surgery, patients are in bed, resting to recover. Now, we got wiser over time, and we may seem crueler because we don't let patients rest as much these days. In fact, there's an awful lot of cancer surgery that's done on an outpatient basis, but still in all for major surgeries, patients are going to be in a hospital bed for a time. And there's loss of muscle strength and bulk for every day you're at complete bed rest, isn't there? You might want to talk about that, because I think that's partly what we're trying to overcome with nutritional support preoperatively, right?
Absolutely. So I'm glad you brought that up. So just to kind of reinforce what I was saying in my previous answer about, needing all the help you can get to recover from the surgery, the help is exactly for that purpose, to help you retain as much muscle mass, prevent as much muscle loss as possible following the surgery. And this is where nutrition really comes into play. Because of all the things that happen to the body from the insult of surgery, this brings on even greater muscle loss. Inflammation leads to muscle loss, so that's probably already happening in somebody with cancer. The surgery brings on even more of that. And then the bed rest associated with the recovery from surgery brings on even more, lack of mobility, which further exacerbates muscle mass. And so one of the ways to reduce the loss is to, before the surgery, eat as many nutrients and as much protein as possible. To give a bit more of a concrete picture, what we know from research is that even in a not ill older adult, in 3 days of bed rest, they can lose up to 10% of their muscle mass. So that loss is amplified in someone with cancer, and especially in someone with cancer who's now recovering from surgery. Thankfully, research has also shown that with the right type of nutritional preparation, the right type of pre-surgery nutrition and exercise, so nutrition does not stand alone, but it's certainly a big factor, the right type of nutrition preparation can really help to minimize that muscle loss after the surgery, which will help for a more quick and smooth recovery.
I'm glad you mentioned a couple of things there. First of all, that there's a research base for this. I have to admit that this is not an area of expertise that I have. And when we start talking about nutritional support to sort of almost, I'll say bulk up prior to surgery, it's really good to know that studies are being done or have been done that show that there's an advantage to individuals in their post-operative phase in recovering and maintaining muscle mass. So I presume that body of research exists. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. That body of research exists. A lot of this comes from, originates or dates back, I should say, to the early 90s, so not too long ago, in Europe, where I believe it was a surgeon by the name of Dr. Ollie Linguist who coined the term in ERAS, E-R-A-S, enhanced recovery after surgery. And from, kind of fast forward to today, these principles of enhanced recovery after surgery have started to become adopted here in Canada. And there are some Canadian surgeons, anesthesiologists, and dietitian and nutrition researchers in Canada who are really leading the advancement of the research in this area. All of it is rooted in the idea that there are many things you can do under the guise, or not the guise, but the umbrella of enhancing recovery after surgery, including preoperative hydration. I won't speak to the medical side of it, the anesthesia and the pharmacotherapy or side of it, but within this concept of enhancing recovery after surgery exists a pillar which is nutrition. So it's really part of the preparation and the recovery process. And that's because preparing for surgery, the kind of belief is that preparing for surgery should be treated like preparing for a marathon. You need to, like you said, bulk up, increase your reserves of nutrients, which helps to promote better muscle reserves. And you said bulk up, and I'm glad that you did, because that's often the term that I use as well. And I don't want, for the listeners, I don't want them to think that we're talking about, getting large, really nicely defined muscles. It's simply just having a a muscle base that will allow you to do the things that you need to do for basic daily activities, like, changing from your pajamas into your outfit of the day, and getting up from your chair and putting the dishes from the dishwasher into your cabinets. These activities require a certain amount of muscle. And so that's what we risk to lose when we sustain a surgery and aren't fit to recover from that surgery.
And you mentioned another thing in your remarks earlier, which was the importance of exercise, because I think that just pouring nutrients into the body without doing anything won't really accomplish a lot. You may store up some glycogen in your liver, giving a bit of an energy reserve, but in terms of making muscle, strengthening muscle, it's going to be a waste if you don't couple it with some exercise beforehand. So I'm interested in to know what researchers are proposing and surgeons are perhaps currently doing who are working in this area. Like, we know that you can wait a number of weeks before cancer surgery. There are wait lists in all of our provinces, I think, and right with post-COVID, those wait lists are fairly long. So it does give patients an opportunity to exercise and to take in incremental nutrition to get in a better state, which may, in a way, help the problem, because maybe there's fewer post-operative complications, shorter lengths of stay, which increases the throughput through the healthcare system. So one can clearly see there might be real advantages not only to the individual patient in getting through the surgery and coming out in a less debilitated state and going home able to do all those things you were just describing, but also advantages to the healthcare system.
That's absolutely right. In Alberta, through, I guess, a lot of research done through the University of Alberta, they've actually demonstrated the cost benefit to the healthcare system of implementing this newer approach to surgery, which consists of the elements that I spoke about from Europe, from the ERAS approach. And I think that's been published now for the last maybe 5 years or so. So Alberta is definitely an early adopter of this new approach, and you can see on their website, I think it's the ERAS Alberta website, they talk about the reduction in length of stay. They talk about and they translate that into the costs that have been saved. And they found that, and I don't remember the specific numbers, but they found that the cost of implementing this new approach, which required a lot of training, a lot of practice changes for the hospitals and for the healthcare professionals, the return on that investment was well worth it. I don't know what the state of this approach is across the rest of the country, with the exception of, to my knowledge, here where I'm based in Montreal, Quebec, there are some centers that are adopting certain components of this approach. I don't want to veer off topic. Am I answering your question?
No, absolutely. And I think it's really important to know that some places in our country are early adopters and contributing to the research. And you did answer the question about the healthcare system impact in terms of cost effectiveness. Clearly, payers would like to find strategies that deliver high-quality care at less cost, and this does sound like that's exactly what it's doing. And frankly, it's new news to me, and I'm delighted to hear it, because I know that with the backlog of cancer surgeries in all the provinces, and in Ontario where I am, it's quite significant, and we're looking for strategies that could be helpful. So what would be entailed then, or what are they doing in Alberta, and maybe greater specifics? Clearly, it must mean more involvement of dietitians with surgeons working as a team to get patients onto a protocol of some sort that provides more protein, more calories, and what amounts of protein and calories over what period of time, and maybe a little bit of, if you can, talk about how they're coupling that with exercise.
Yeah. So I'll speak to, within my role, I certainly have the privilege of interacting with healthcare professionals from all across the country, and that's one of the things that I love about about my position here at Abbott. I have to say it's been some time, at least 6 to 8 months since I've connected with the folks out in Alberta who are really spearheading this approach, but I'll speak based on my knowledge of the most recent literature that I've been exposed to, some webinars that I've attended, and so on. So what I know about what's going on currently in Canada in terms of these early adopters, I believe it really originated and developed specifically in colorectal cancer surgeries, for those patients. I know that the evidence exists to establish this type of approach in many different types of patients with cancer going for surgery, and I'm not too sure what's going on, from one hospital to another in terms of, are they only offering these services for such and such diagnosis and not others? That I'm not sure. But in general, what I can say about the pre-surgery preparation approach, the, I guess, best practice would be to identify patients who are most vulnerable as soon as their surgery date is scheduled. And so at that point, that is your opportunity once you've used some methods to determine which patients are most at risk of muscle loss and malnutrition during their surgery, and their surgery is, let's say, 4 weeks out or 6 weeks out, once they've had their date. This is the window where you can give them that targeted nutrition and exercise advice to help them stay as fit as possible while they're waiting for their surgery. And so once patients receive their date for their surgery, they should be screened for malnutrition risk by a dietitian. This would happen in the pre-op clinic, pre-operative assessment. Most surgical centers would have this process. And once they're found to be at risk, which doesn't take very long, it takes a couple of minutes, a few questions, you can identify those patients. Those are the patients who should be given that extra advice to increase their calorie intake, increase their protein intake, and the dietitian can get quite specific about what would work well for that patient to achieve those calorie and protein goals. And ideally, they would also be seen by, I guess, an exercise physiologist or a kinesiologist to give targeted exercise advice as well, which is, to your point, like you said, you need both, right, to help maintain muscle. You can't only rely on exercise, because if you're not getting the right nutrition, that's just adding more stress to your muscles without replenishing them. And you certainly can't rely on nutrition alone either. It won't be as effective as combining the two. So all of that advice should be given to a patient at least 4 weeks before surgery. That's what expert guidelines recommend, is that patients really try to increase their calorie intake with a specific focus on increasing their protein intake. And the protein intake, or the recommendations for the patient, are quite high, probably more than what a patient is used to consuming.
Why don't you go into that in a little bit of detail just before we take a brief break, but tell us just how much protein, and maybe after the break we'll go into the specifics of what that might look like and the sources of the protein and calories. But a 70-kilogram man, that's me, right? What would I require in terms of protein if I was looking malnourished prior to my colorectal cancer surgery? How much protein a day, and what might that translate that into something meaningful,
something tangible?
Yes.
Yeah, so as dietitians, we use all kinds of numbers and rules of thumb that mean absolutely nothing to the person receiving the information. But we really estimate protein requirements as a function of current body weight and as a function of current health state. And we always do it in terms of grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So if you're telling me that you're 70 kilos, well, that's about 155 pounds, which would translate to approximately, let's say that you're someone with cancer who's waiting for surgery. That would translate to about 105 grams of protein per day, which is kind of 50% more than what you would need if you were just a healthy person of that size who didn't have cancer and wasn't going for surgery. So the needs are higher for someone who's waiting for surgery. You might need something like 75 grams of protein without any illness and without going for surgery. But because of the surgery, that need goes up to about 105 grams of protein. Now, what is 105 grams of protein? It sounds like a big number. I'll tell you as a dietitian, that is a big number. I certainly don't get anywhere near that amount of protein in a day. If I use one food to illustrate this, this would be about 15 eggs or 3 to 4 chicken breasts. Of course, I don't think anyone is, nor should they, eat 15 eggs in one sitting. Every food provides, not every, but most foods provide some quantity of protein. And the best thing to do, and this is good advice for anybody, but especially if you're someone, someone living with cancer, someone going for surgery, and you really want to maintain your muscle mass or minimize muscle loss, spread out the protein during the day. If it's 105 grams, that's about 30 grams per meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then you still have a little bit that you need to top off, so you can have some snacks that have protein as well.
I'm going to ponder what that looks like while we take a break. It seems to me you'll be eating a lot of protein 3 or 4 times a day to get ready for this surgery, but if it makes a difference, that's really important. So we'll be right back in a moment and talking to Janna Boloten about preparing for cancer surgery in an optimal way. We'll be right back.
We'd like to take a moment to thank our generous supporters, the Hutton Family Fund and Banco Creative Studio, who help make the Cancer Assist podcast possible. The Cancer Assistance Program is as busy as ever, providing essential support to patients and their families. We remain committed to providing free services for patients in our community, including transportation and equipment loans, personal care and comfort items, parking, and practical education. These services are made possible by the generosity of our donors through one-time gifts, monthly donations, third-party fundraising, corporate sponsorships, and volunteer opportunities. Visit cancerassist.ca to see how you can make a difference in the lives of cancer patients and their families.
So we're back talking about preparing for a cancer surgery and how to really bulk up in advance of it, and just the amount of protein that might be necessary to optimize the preparation for your surgery to get the best possible outcomes. That's what we want always. So maybe we need to talk, because I'm not sure that most people really understand much about what foods are protein, and are any plant-based sources also protein, and things like that. So I know there's animal protein, there's plant-based protein. Why don't we talk a little bit about the sources of those, and maybe to some extent an idea of quantities, but I don't want to get bogged down in that, because I think the dietitian will have to make those decisions with the individual patients, won't they, at the time of the preoperative assessment.
Definitely. So yes, dietitians will be able to give really specific, quantities, simple ways for the patient to know whether or not they're getting enough. So just earlier we talked about 105 grams of protein a day for somebody who's about 155 pounds. Spreading this out over the course of the day would look like about 30 grams of protein per meal, and then a couple of snacks as well at about 10 grams, or 5 to 10 grams per snack, if my mental math is right. So protein can come from either what we call animal-based sources or plant-based sources, and both are good and both are important. Really, it's about mixing it up and doing whatever it is that you need to do in a way that you enjoy and can sustain to meet that protein target, because this is ultimately what's going to help keep your muscles as fit as possible. So animal protein, what is that? Well, that's dairy foods like yogurt. Of course, there's the Greek style yogurts, which are a lot higher in protein than the non-Greek style yogurts, but both are, both types are sources of protein. About half a cup of that, a bowl full of that, that would give you anywhere between 10 and 20 grams of protein, depending on the type. A glass of milk, a standard serving of milk, a 8-ounce cup of milk is about 8 to 10 grams of protein, so that works as well. Cottage cheese works as well. Other cheeses are not really high in protein. They're mostly fat. So you're not going to get, your serving of protein from cheddar cheese or, a grilled cheese sandwich. That will not provide protein. So when it comes to dairy sources, it's really yogurt and milk that are your protein-rich sources of dairy. Then, of course, you have eggs. One egg gives you 8 grams of protein, so a 2 or 3 egg omelet is great to start your day. Chicken and fish and beef are also really, palatable, and these are probably your most, I'll use the word efficient because these pack in the most protein for the smallest quantity. So just 3 ounces of chicken, which is about a deck of cards in terms of size, is 20 grams of protein. So that can be a really good way at lunch and dinner to get there. If you have, your piece of chicken on your plate, which is usually between 3 and 4 ounces, and then you've got, let's say, some potatoes, some veggies, maybe a bit of rice, the other foods will top off. Those other foods, potato, grains, that kind of thing, those provide small amounts, but still do provide some protein. So with that 20 to 25 grams from the chicken, plus the other foods, you've got your 30 grams right there. Fish. I didn't mention fish yet. Fish is a phenomenal source of protein as well. It's the same in terms of, it's like chicken in terms of, 3 ounces is roughly 20 grams of protein. The fattier kinds of fish, like salmon and tuna, are kind of a double whammy for nutrition, especially for preparing for surgery, because not only are they high in protein, but they're high in omega-3 fats. And omega-3 fats have anti-inflammatory properties that provide benefits to the muscles, but also provide other benefits to the body for everybody, and especially for people who are going for surgery. So we can get back to omega-3s a little bit later if you want, but I wanted to point out that fish is a really important protein source that should be included during this surgery preparation phase.
And what about things like skim milk powder? Gather it's quite easily accessible, it's affordable, it's pretty high in protein as well.
Yeah, so back when I worked in the oncology clinic, in the hospital where I was working before I joined Abbott, skim milk powder was one of the most common things we suggested to patients, because despite the fact that there's all these, the foods that I just named probably all sound really delicious to you and I, they're not always palatable when you're going through cancer treatment. You don't always feel like eating them. And so skim milk powder is something you buy at the grocery store. It's usually in the baking section. Somehow it's always on the bottom shelf. It's really inexpensive, and it's basically whey protein powder. This is basically what it is, and it can be stirred into lots of different things. Of course, it can be stirred into, your yogurt and your regular glass of milk to make it like a high protein milk or a higher protein yogurt, but you can also stir it into mashed potatoes. You can stir it into a pasta sauce. You can treat it like a just powder supplement. But the beauty of it is that it's from the grocery store, and it's really inexpensive, and it's almost entirely protein. So we would encourage this as well in people who are just not so in the mood to eat a big piece of chicken.
So then there are the plant-based sources of protein you mentioned. What are they?
Yes. Yeah. Plant-based sources of protein, these are really affordable. They come in cans, so things like chickpeas, things that grow in the ground, chickpeas and lentils, even nuts and seeds. These don't provide as much bang for your buck in terms of protein. You would need to eat a whole lot of nuts to get the same amount of protein that you would get from one egg, but they're very nutritious. They also have some omega-3 omega-3s in them, the nuts and the seeds. And they can be sprinkled on lots of different things. Your salads, your yogurt, just kind of a handful as a snack midday. So not only do they provide you with that extra protein, but they provide you, like I said, with the omega-3s, and they're calorically dense. So in a small amount, you get a lot of calories, which is good for people who don't want to lose any weight. And then, of course, your nut butters, like your peanut butter and your almond butter, which are easy to find nowadays. Those can be, I eat it by the spoonful. You can spread it on rice cakes. You can spread it on bread. You can be creative with those as well, and those are great plant-based sources of protein.
So you mentioned calories there, that these are good sources of calories, and But I think you've also referred to some other things in the course of the last few minutes of talking about things like putting melted margarine or butter or drizzle oil over your meal and so on to add calories, and maybe there's some other creative things. I feel like I'm running a kitchen show right now, but it's definitely not my strong suit. I'm the sous chef. I just do what I'm told in the kitchen.
So yeah, calories are, you know what? Calories are just as important as protein, especially in this context. People often don't think about calories as much, especially if anyone has ever tried intentionally to, lose weight in their past for aesthetic or other reasons. They were probably avoiding calories, and calories might have a bit of a bad rap, but calories are needed to maintain your weight, to prevent weight loss, and that includes, muscle is weight. So you need protein to maintain your muscles, but you also need the adequate amount of calories. If you're eating enough protein, or let me put it this way, if you're getting your, let's say, 105 grams of protein a day, but you're eating that within a low calorie diet, you're going to lose weight nonetheless, and therefore you're going to lose muscle nonetheless, even if you're getting your protein requirements. So the calories, your overall daily calorie intake needs to be enough to maintain or increase your weight. Otherwise, the protein, won't do anything. If your body is losing weight overall, you will be losing muscle. So that's why for anybody with cancer, and often it's not just those awaiting surgery, it's anyone with cancer who's going through treatment. We talk about a high calorie, high protein diet because both are extremely important. And so that goes back to your question about, how do we increase our caloric intake, especially during a time where appetite might be low, we might be experiencing taste changes and other unpleasant symptoms that actually take away from the desire to eat. So we have to find ways to sneak in the calories and choose foods that are really calorically dense, like nuts, to help us increase our intake without eating too much volume. So, I like to say, think of this as all the things you probably were avoiding if you've ever tried to lose weight, right? Add oil to your food, eat fried foods, eat French fries, drizzle sauces like chocolate sauce or syrup over your ice cream, melt butter or margarine and just pour that over your plate of food. Eat avocado. I mean, this is very, very nutritious and high in calories as well. Things like granola cereals that have nuts in them basically are quite calorie dense too. So there's a lot of ways a dietitian can help you incorporate high calorie foods in the most healthful and nutritious way possible. And this is just as important as getting enough protein.
Wow, that's a lot to take in, particularly for someone who stays out of the kitchen. But is there you've talked about all the natural ways, which is great because that's what we should emphasize. But I imagine some individuals would just find maybe the quantities of some of these foods, or maybe they have a more limited number of foods that they like to eat. Is there then a role for any of the supplements that we'd use perhaps in the later stages of cancer in trying to help these individuals who are going to surgery get bulked up?
Absolutely. So and I'm really glad you brought that up. As a dietitian, I get carried away with the food and I can go on and on about all the fun recipes you can make, but you need to have the energy for that. You need to be able to get to the grocery store, right? There's a lot of effort involved there. And so nutritional supplements are extremely helpful. They're widely available nowadays. And so this is something that can really help people at any point throughout their cancer journey, but especially in preparation for surgery when they have really elevated calorie and protein requirements. Oral nutritional supplements, as we broadly refer to, are commercially made products that come in either powder or liquid form, different flavors. They're usually relatively, they have a sweet taste. They come in a few different sweet flavors: chocolate, vanilla, strawberry. And they come in different levels of calorie, with different levels of calorie and protein, and they also include the full range of vitamins and minerals that you would get from what we would consider a balanced meal. So they're really practical. They're made, especially if it's a liquid, they're made ready to drink. You don't need to prepare them at all. In fact, they don't even need to be refrigerated. They usually provide, at least 9 to 10 grams of protein for a serving, and they provide at least, I'm thinking in my nutrition terms, 1 calorie per milliliter, but one bottle will provide roughly 220, 230 calories. Or you can find a really high calorie supplement, which will give you 350 calories for the same, volume. So that's a bit thicker. And that's great for someone who really is having a hard time eating a full meal. And so, yes, these definitely play a role. They're something that can be consumed daily, poured into a coffee, consumed on its own, made into a smoothie, and so on.
So there are definitely options to use that to supplement the other advice that a dietitian is going to give about all the incremental amounts of protein and calories necessary in that preoperative phase. It sounds like we're kind of on the bleeding edge of change in surgical practice. To have better outcomes, more quick rehabilitation of patients, potentially shorter hospital stays. I really think that this could be a big change for how surgery is organized and delivered. I can't help but also adding to it, one of the important changes I'd like to see is to make sure in the same preoperative phase that patients are helped to stop smoking, because that affects the outcomes of cancer surgery. The perioperative mortality is less in people who go through cancer surgery and stop smoking. The postoperative complications from pulmonary infections, wound delayed healing, all those things are affected by smoking. So if you're going to invest all this energy into improving the physical health of the person and getting them stronger and better able to withstand the surgery, we should be investing in also helping them to quit smoking as well for the optimal outcomes, I would think. I think this has been really eye-opening to me. I hope it's been eye-opening to our listeners, because it's really new, and it's been exciting to talk to you and hear about this. Are there any sort of final thoughts you might have that you'd like to leave our listeners with, Janna?
Yeah. Oh gosh, so many thoughts, and I'm so glad that you're passionate about this topic. I guess what I would say is, for those out there listening, if it's you or a loved one who's facing cancer and who might have a surgery on the horizon, ask your healthcare professional about your nutrition status. We're really trying to raise awareness on the fact that malnutrition is a real problem here in Canada, and not in the same way as it might be in other parts of the world where the food supply is really scarce. Of course, it's different here, but where it is a problem here in Canada is really with our older adult population, and also our population who are living with illnesses. And so because of their vulnerability, their nutrition status is at risk of being compromised, and healthcare professionals, dietitians know about this, but the general, overarching sort of allied health team doesn't know as much about the problem of malnutrition here in Canada. So what I would love to leave our listeners with is, as a patient, self-advocacy is so important, and nutrition is something you can take into your own hands and do while you're at home waiting for answers from your health team. So ask your healthcare providers, what about my nutrition? Is there anything a dietitian can do to help me better prepare for my chemotherapy or my surgery? And like I said, we're trying to raise awareness. We have a lot of education coming out of the programs here at Abbott, but just having the patient ask the question can help sensitize them, raise that awareness, maybe connect them with the dietitian in the clinic, and they can get some of that advice, that personalized advice that they can really use to self-empower and take charge on their own.
I think that's a really important message. And you may recall when we talked last, I confessed that most doctors don't know much about nutrition and don't know how to counsel a patient about nutrition, and probably will not bring it up if the patient doesn't take the initiative to raise it. So it's really important to all those who are listening, if they're either a patient or a care provider, to be proactive and to ask about consulting with a dietitian to get advice about supports during the journey of cancer, whether it's preoperatively or in other phases of the journey, because I think it's an underutilized body of knowledge, and there are clear benefits of getting nutritional support during the cancer journey. As before, Janna, it's been a great pleasure talking to you. You're a font of information. It's been very helpful, I'm sure, to our listeners to hear you talk about this, and I think quite exciting to hear some new uses of nutrition in the cancer journey in the preoperative state. So I thank you very, very much, and thank our listeners for joining us, and stay tuned, and next month there will be another episode of the Cancer Assist Show with Dr. Bill Evans. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Cancer Assist podcast. Find more episodes, resources, and information at cancerassist.ca, or follow the Cancer Assistance Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll see you next time.